Smoov and Curly on video.
Hi, Michael. How are you doing? Oh, man.
When we left off last time, you had said that you thought that the next episode would be extremely significant and important, and you accelerated our pace in creating these videos so that I had to edit the previous one really fast, and we had to watch this one really fast. Was it worth it?
Well, was it worth it to me that you had to do all that work? Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely worth it. But more importantly, I do think this episode was quite significant.
Oh, okay. That's what I was actually asking. But let's go through some of the characters and remind ourselves kind of what interesting things happened to them.
Okay, I do, by the way, have a fundamental question, and maybe I can ask it now, and you can help me figure this out as we go through some of the characters.
So just to be clear, you always do this. I have a plan. You're like, I understand that you have a plan, but maybe your plan would be better if it were my plan. And somehow I never learn.
I want to go your plan, but I just want, as you walk through the character, I assume the first character, I could be wrong, but I assume the first character will be Dolores.
Dolores.
I've actually remembered now. And I have a question about her. And so
I'm starting to remember too.
That's exactly right. When do her conversations with Jim Gordon actually happen?
That's a really good question. I wonder if she is asleep in the world and then wanders over to the other building and has a conversation with her and then wanders back.
Or are we actually seeing conversations that happened a while ago? So as we last left Dolores, she had actually killed someone, which she was not previously able to do, when the voice of Arnold said, "Kill him." That's my invitation to her.
And not the least bit creepy.
No, not at all. And then the good guy person.
Right, his name is William.
So he finds her, and as she wanders into his campsite thingy, and then she sort of falls into his arms. And I think that's the last thing that we see of her at the end of the last episode.
That's what I thought.
In this episode, she wakes up the next day, I guess, and he's standing over her, and she's got a gun next to her, and he's sort of standing over her and smiling. But just before that, we see her having at least one, maybe two, conversations with Bernard, or Jim Gordon, as I like to think of him. And there's no, I mean, is it supposed to be the case that while everyone was sleeping, she got taken back, they had a conversation, and then they put her back? Or did that happen a while ago? You know, I should probably pay closer attention to his hair. Okay, so what did you think about her character arc this episode?
Yeah, I feel like she's really coming into her own, and she's starting, for example, to speak poetically as she does in character, but some of it is her own stuff now. And she's being sent by Bernard on a quest for the maze. Did
I write that for you, Michael?
Well, you wrote it, but then I modified it to fit the situation.
I think I would like to be free.
Right. I think I want to be free. Yeah. Yeah. Because he asks her, "What do you want?" And she's like, "I don't know." And then they talk a little bit more, and she's like, "I think I know what I want. I think I want to be free." And she's like, "Okay." Well, he's like, "Okay, well, we'll send you to the maze." Now, I think we have no idea at this point why that's a good idea.
There's something else going on here, and we're just going to have to figure out what it is. I mean, one thing that did happen, not to jump character, I mean, I guess we're talking about both Bernard and Dolores. In fact, their arcs this time are very, in fact, for the last episode as well, are very tied together. But what's happening in episode 4 is that everyone is converging on the maze. Speaking of which, we find out the motivation of the Man in Black.
And we learned that in the real world, he actually runs some kind of important and benevolent foundation. But when he's on vacation, F you. Like, he doesn't want to be associated with those kinds of positive things.
Huh. A lot of things happened this episode. Like a whole lot of things moved along. And by the way, they didn't just move along, but as a bit of meta commentary, I really enjoyed that the Man in Black more than once said, "Yeah, I don't have time to wait for this, so we're going to move it along."
Yeah, I've definitely done that in video games.
Yeah, and I felt that way about the episode too. Like, look, okay, it's time to move things along.
Oh,
and
I see.
It felt like he's standing in for me and going, "Okay, but we're going to move this along now." And it gave him an excuse to do things that you otherwise might not have been able to do narratively. By just declaring out loud that we're now going to move the narrative along, you're able to move the narrative along. I think it's wonderful. So Dolores is growing and growing and growing and becoming much more aware. Bernard clearly wants this to happen. I mean, he's not just, curiously trying to see. He seems to want this to be the path, right? Wants her to be free. I don't know why.
Did you catch that she, when he asked her about taking away her pain about the dad and the mom and Teddy all getting killed, that he said, "Can I take the pain away?" And she's like, "No, the pain is all I have left." And that was almost an exact quote for what he said to his wife in the previous episode about his son being dead.
So Maeve, in parallel, is also remembering things and coming to some conclusions about the world, in parallel with what Dolores is doing. That's happening, and it's happening in a very different way. In fact, what I find it quite interesting, right, that Dolores's growth and awareness of herself and her memories are being very carefully guided, in some sense, by Bernard, whereas Maeve is coming to that on her own without any guidance, and it is a much more painful and intense learning experience as a result. And I suspect the writers, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect the writers didn't intend it this way, but it does feel like a kind of commentary on what it means to achieve freedom when you come from very different socioeconomic backgrounds. And the sort of choice, the race here actually plays a pretty significant role, even if it's not intended to.
Yeah, so the thing that, so my takeaway from the Maeve drawing a picture of the people that she saw, and then wanting to hide that and discovering that she had already wanted to hide that, to me was that not that she's starting to remember, which is like Dolores, but she's now getting a glimmer that she's remembering that she has remembered.
Right, exactly.
Right? And now we're starting to see the iteration happening. We're seeing the loop itself becoming visible.
But one gets the impression it's leaking through. It's like it's exponential, and we've now hit the elbow of the curve. If they're not doing this on purpose, if they don't know about it, then this is pretty amazing, right? That the system, the collection of people individually learning and remembering various things has created a kind of permanent cross-iterative memory that is like passing information down from generation to generation through stories, right? It's religion. It's a religion for the Native Americans, but it's a way of remembering from generation to generation, right? And although they're the same person or the same entity, they are in some sense generation to generation. And that's how they're passing it down to themselves. That is a fundamental mechanism of memory and learning, right? And it makes learning go faster if you can pass those memories down, even if they're highly stylized. And so as a kind of programming trope, that's actually very neat, right? It's like passing along the weights of your last iteration on your neural network as your initial conditions. You kind of remember everything, even if you don't.
It's kind of a form of transfer learning.
Yes, it's self-transfer learning. It's like generational trauma transfer. What's going on with Hannibal Lecter?
Yeah, so Ford had a really intense scene with Teresa, the middle manager, and it was very, very dark. So he makes this very subtle, very powerful show of control where they're in the park and they're having a meal together. And first of all, without any indication of doing so, he makes the entire team of robots and hosts freeze in place.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. It's almost like he could just do it with his mind.
Mm-hmm.
He also, so that was like basically asserting, I have complete control over this park. Like you're in my house. Then he went even a step further, and he had seated her for this meal at exactly the seat that she ate at the park when she was a child, which is again like, this is my house. I control all these robots, and by the way, I also control you.
Going back to this notion of loops and iteration, a couple of things I'd add to what you say. One is he says, we almost always, I've had this conversation before, and we almost always find a way to accommodate each other. This is not the first loop. This is the 30th or the 40th or the 50th loop.
Right, in the sense that he's there as part of the park forever, but
Mhm.
these managers come and go.
Right. And, we'll make it work out. Oh, and by the way, of course I know that you sat at this table because we know everything about our guests.
But what is he trying, like, if you get to that mindset, why you bother doing anything? What's in it for him? What is he trying to accomplish?
I just kind of assume they all go insane. And at some point, you want to create perfect life. And, you know, I
Well,
think he wants people to go to the center of the maze. He wants to create a story that's gonna, lead to whatever it was Arnold was trying to do in the first place. But I could be wrong about that. Everyone's headed towards Wyatt.
yes.
Was Wyatt always there?
My take was that the storyline is getting nudged towards this new storyline that Ford is constructing. And so we're starting to see the new storyline and the old storyline, kind of like the truck that's tearing up the ground. Like the new stories are starting to kind of impinge into the old stories, and it's changing them in the process.
But what is his story? Like, is his story the creation of real consciousness in life, or is he really just trying to make another story and it's just going to get away from him? I didn't realize this before, but Teresa is in charge of the QA team, right?
Mm-hmm.
QA is taking over this, right?
Yeah.
Which Bernard gave in quite quickly and pissed off the other programmer person.
Couldn't debug a crumpled up napkin, right? They're doing everything. They also seem to be controlling the story in the park, and they seem to be in control of the safety of people. Like they seem to be, I don't know, like the police maybe.
Yeah, the whole thing's very weird. I don't know if it's QA in the way we tend to think about QA, but it's interesting. But the second thing is the fundamental data structure here, in some sense, is the narrative, right? It's the story that drives everything, and everything is in relation to that. We're seeing something that we haven't seen before, which is multiple narratives, as you say, impinging upon one another, and therefore leading to changes. And it feels as if there are transition periods, right? It's not like, okay, here's a new narrative, here's a new story, everything is different now. It almost feels like the world transfers and transitions over time.
Mm.
We're actually seeing that. This happens to be a particularly interesting one as all the robots go crazy or whatever. But it's kind of, I don't know. To me, that was very interesting because I was asking myself, well, if we really did program this way, is this what we would expect to happen? And yeah, it kind of is. Remember, we used to talk about this, about, how would you know if you're debugging, whether it's a bug or it's just you're in the middle of learning?
Mm.
I kind of feel like this whole episode was that.
I see. So things that are happening because we're in transition between these two different significant storylines. Though to me, the computing analog that I was thinking about throughout the episode was the halting problem. So this notion that you're in a loop, and what does it mean to be in a loop? What does it mean to be able to break out of a loop? Is it really a loop if it's a little bit different each time? Like if you can leave a note for yourself, that kind of unravels a loop. And can the system itself detect that it's in a loop? Because the system itself, that reflection process is part of what it is. And maybe that is also being into the loop. So we have this notion of the halting problem in computing that says you can't make a program that could look at other programs to figure out whether they're actually trapped in a loop going around and around and around. But really the idea is you, the program, like if you were the program, you couldn't tell about yourself whether you were stuck in a loop.
Right. In fact, that's the proof. The proof is if the program is looking at itself.
I feel like everyone's gnawing at the edges of this in the story. Everyone's like, Bernard is stuck in a kind of a loop. The characters in the hosts are stuck in a kind of a loop. Everybody's, in that sort of comfortable zone, but then it's starting to fray and it's starting to break out, and it's unclear what happens when the loop bursts.
That's both a good computing observation, but also a good metaphor, right? I mean, the narrative, it's not, I mean, in fact, they say this a lot, it's the narrative loop. And we're now only 4 episodes in, we have seen the bad guys come into town and kill everybody, feels like 300 times. And it's different every single time. And if it's always different, how do you know if you're in an infinite loop, and what does it even mean? And then what happens if you break out of the loop? And of course, as you say, it's all about self-reflection. And that's the thing that, gives us Gödel's incompleteness theorem and gives us all of these problems. So this is the problem of self-reflection. If if you were sort of a philosopher, computer scientist, as it were, writing this, you would be working very hard to basically make the statement that it is the self-reflection that allows you to solve the halting problem. That's what's happening. We're giving all of these otherwise intelligent beings this sort of self-reflection, and that's what will break them out, and that's what will make them truly human, as it were.
Yeah, there's an argument that some people have made that the difference between, the reason machines can't ever be truly conscious is because of the halting problem, whereas the halting problem doesn't apply to us because we have this other realm of awareness. I would argue that that's not true, but I have heard that argument made.
The fundamental proof of the halting problem at the end of the day, although it's much more elegant when you talk about it in computer science, you talk about it in terms of sets, right? What's really happening is the set of problems are the reals and the set of solutions are the integers. And the reals, the reals are infinite, the integers are infinite, but the reals are a larger set of infinite than the integers. Mm-hmm. The argument that I've heard is that machines are always going to be stuck at Aleph null because at the end of the day, they've got memory. But humans, because we have neurons in our heads, can actually represent real values, right? And because we can represent real values, we really are living in we're living outside the halting, because the halting problem is a real value problem, right? Not a countably infinite problem. And so long as machines are stuck in the world of countably infinite, they can't be truly intelligent.
Well, so there was the other quote from Elsie that I liked in this episode was she referred to the head of the robot that bashed his own head in as wetware.
Yeah.
And so it's possible that it's not the kind of computing that we have today. It may actually be smooshier. And I think I've seen a complexity result that basically says smooshier properly contains Turing machines.
That would make sense. So yes, I enjoyed this episode.
All right.
I really like this a lot. I can't wait to see what happens next. But I like this whole narrative loop thing. The question is it real or not, right? So are you deluding yourself into thinking it's real? Or do you think it doesn't matter if it isn't real? If it isn't real, but it behaves as if it's real, you are sort of ethically obliged to treat it as if it's real. So yeah, actually, I hadn't thought about it this way, but this is interesting. If Logan is kind of parallel to Maeve in some sense, in saying none of this matters, and William is parallel to Dolores in saying it does matter, what does that say about where they're heading, and what does that say about Maeve?
Yeah, I in my TEDx Boston talk, I ended it with basically teach your robots well. Like it matters. It's not just like, oh, they're going to take over, and it's like, no, they're at the moment anyway, they're still our kids, and right, we can do a lot to shape the direction that they're headed.
Unstructured guidance and structured guidance, a huge difference.
Yeah,
there's a lesson here about the way we build intelligent machines. We must guide them, because otherwise they come to the conclusion that nothing matters. There's a lesson there, Michael. There's a lesson there.